There was a time when stories did not belong to human beings. They belonged to Niam, the sky god. He held every story that had ever existed or would ever exist, locked away in a great wooden box, kept in the heavens, out of reach of every creature on earth. No tale could be told, no legend could be passed from one mouth to another, no account of the great deeds or the terrible failures or the strange and funny and heartbreaking things that happened in the world could be shared, because all of it, every story, was the property of the god who owned the sky. The world below was a quiet place because of this, not peaceful, just silent in the way that things are silent when something essential is missing and no one yet has the word to name what that something is. Then Anansi the Spider decided he wanted them. He was small. He was not a warrior. He owned nothing of value and commanded nothing of power. He was, by every ordinary measurement available, the least likely creature in all of creation to approach the sky god with a demand. And that is precisely why he was the one who did it. The bargain. Anansi climbed his web from the earth to the sky. A journey that in the telling always sounds simple, and in the doing was the first of many things Anansi accomplished that no one else had thought to attempt. And he came before Niam and said that he wanted to buy the sky god's stories. Niam laughed, not a dismissive laugh, a genuinely amused one. Kings and warriors and powerful spirits had come before him wanting many things, and the sky god had dealt with all of them according to his power. But a spider coming to buy his stories. This was new. This was, if nothing else, interesting. Niam named his price. Bring me Onini the Python, who is longer than any path through the forest and stronger than any man who has walked it. Bring me Osebo the Leopard, whose teeth have ended more lives in this forest than any other creature walking it. Bring me the Hornets, whose swarm has driven elephants from water and made warriors abandon their weapons and run. Bring me Mmoatia the Fairy, the small and terrible spirit that no one has ever seen and lived to describe clearly. For impossible things, that was the price of all the stories in the world. Niam said this expecting Anansi to turn around and climb back down his web. He said it the way powerful people state impossible prices, not as a genuine negotiation, but as a dismissal dressed in the language of commerce. Anansi said that he agreed to the price. Then he climbed back down his web and started thinking. Onini the Python. Anansi went home and talked to his wife Oso, who in many versions of this story is the practical intelligence behind the plans Anansi takes credit for executing. She told him what to do. He cut a long branch from a palm tree. He gathered some vines. He walked through the forest talking to himself loudly, in the particular way that someone talks to themselves when they want to be overheard, saying that his wife was wrong and he was right, and that, yes, the branch was longer than Onini the Python, and that anyone who said otherwise was mistaken. Onini heard this. Onini, who was proud of his length the way all long things are proud of being long, slid out from wherever he was resting and asked what exactly this small spider thought he was arguing about. Anansi said with great apparent reluctance that his wife had claimed Onini was longer than this palm branch, and that he himself had said no, surely the branch was longer. And now he was not sure who was right, and perhaps Onini would settle it by lying beside the branch so a proper comparison could be made. Onini agreed. He stretched himself out beside the palm branch, full length, extending from his head to the very tip of his tail, with the particular pride of a creature demonstrating its most impressive quality. And while Onini was busy being impressive, Anansi tied him to the branch with the vine, coil after coil after coil, from head to tail, before the python understood what was happening. Onini was caught not by strength or by poison or by any weapon. He was caught by his own vanity, presented to him in a form he could not resist engaging with. Anansi carried him up to Niam. The Hornets, for the Hornets, Anansi cut a gourd and filled it with water. He walked through the forest until he found the hornet's nest, and he stood beneath it and poured some of the water over himself, then poured the rest over the nest, then stood directly beneath the hornets with a large leaf held over his head. The hornets, wet and confused and suddenly concerned about the rain, began to look for somewhere to shelter. Anansi helpfully pointed out that his gourd was hollow and dry and would provide excellent shelter from the rain that was obviously falling. The hornets flew into the gourd. Anansi plugged the opening. He carried them up to Niam. The story pauses here in its telling to note something. Anansi did not trick the hornets by making them do something foolish. He created a situation in which they did the entirely reasonable thing for hornets to do, sought shelter from rain, and then took advantage of the reasonableness of their response. This is the particular quality that separates Anansi's intelligence from simple deception. He does not win by making others stupid. He wins by understanding what others will reasonably do and arranging things so that the reasonable action serves his purpose. Osebo the Leopard. For Osebo the Leopard, Anansi dug a pit on the path. He knew the leopard walked at night. He covered it carefully with branches and leaves so that the surface looked like the path itself. Osebo walked his path at night and fell in. In the morning Anansi came and expressed great concern and sorrow that Osebo had fallen. He offered to help. He bent a young tree down into the pit so that Osebo could climb up it and escape. Then as Osebo climbed, Anansi tied the leopard's tail to the tree and let the tree spring back upright so that Osebo hung suspended upside down from a tree, caught before he could gather himself to strike. Anansi carried him up to Niam, or in some versions, Anansi simply killed Osebo in the pit and carried the body. The story shifts slightly here, depending on who is telling it and where. In some tellings Anansi is merciful, in others the transaction simply requires delivery of the leopard and does not specify in which condition. What every version agrees on is that Osebo the Leopard, whose teeth had ended more lives in that forest than any other creature, was brought to the sky god by a spider. Mmoatia the Fairy. Mmoatia was the hardest, not because the fairy was powerful in any direct physical sense, but because the fairy could not be seen clearly, could not be approached directly, existed at the edge of perception, present in the forest, but always slightly beyond where attention could fix itself firmly enough to act. Anansi carved a wooden doll. He covered it in sticky tree gum. He placed it at the base of the odum tree, where the fairies were known to come, and he placed beside it a bowl of yam. Then he attached a vine to the doll, and hid himself and waited. Mmoatia came. The fairy saw the doll and the yam, and, being a fairy and therefore curious about anything new in the forest, greeted the doll. The doll did not answer. Anansi pulled the vine gently, and the doll's head moved slightly, as if acknowledging the greeting without committing to a full response. Mmoatia offered to share the yam. The doll did not answer. Mmoatia offered again. Anansi did not move the vine this time, and the doll stood perfectly still, and the fairy interpreted this stillness as the particular rudeness of a stranger refusing to acknowledge a generous offer. Mmoatia struck the doll. The fairy's hand stuck in the gum. Mmoatia struck with the other hand. That hand stuck too, and Anansi came out from hiding and tied the fairy securely and carried Mmoatia up to the sky. The moment of transfer. Niam looked at what the spider had brought him. The python, the hornets, the leopard, the fairy, 4 impossible things, delivered by a creature with no army, no weapons, no size, no inherited power of any kind. The sky god called his court together, and he spoke to them about what this spider had accomplished. He said that the great chiefs and warriors of the earth had come before him and failed. He said that Anansi the Spider had succeeded, and then Niam did what he had promised. He gave Anansi the box, all the stories in the world, every tale that had ever been told or would ever be told, every account of heroism and cowardice, of love and betrayal, of gods and mortals, of the beginning of the world and the end of empires, of small children outsmarting powerful kings, and powerful kings being humbled by the smallest creatures they had overlooked. From that moment, they were called Anansi stories, spider stories, and Anansi brought them back down to earth. And he opened the box, and the stories went everywhere, into the mouths of grandmothers sitting beside fires, into the memories of children who heard one thing and remembered it forever, into the long chain of voices that passed what had been heard to the next person who needed to hear it, and the next, and the next. What was carried across the water. The Ashanti people of what is now Ghana are the originators of the Anansi tradition. The oldest recorded versions of these stories come from the Akan-speaking peoples of West Africa, where Anansi occupies a specific and honored role in the cosmology, not simply a folk character, but a divine trickster, a being who exists at the intersection of the human world and the divine one, who mediates between ordinary intelligence and something larger. When the transatlantic slave trade tore millions of people from the Gold Coast and carried them across the ocean to the Caribbean, to Brazil, to the colonies that would become the United States, they carried almost nothing material with them. What was taken from them was nearly total. But stories cannot be confiscated at a port. Stories do not appear on a manifest. Stories cannot be weighed or taxed or locked in a hold. Anansi crossed the ocean in the only way anything can cross an ocean that offers no passage. In memory, in the mouth, in the act of one person telling another in whatever darkness was available. He arrived in Jamaica, in Trinidad, in Suriname, in South Carolina. In every place the ships arrived, and he began again. In the Caribbean, he became Anansi, or Nancy. He acquired new characteristics that fit the new world he found himself operating in. The plantation, the overseer, the impossible power imbalance between those who owned everything and those who owned nothing, including their own labor. In this new context, Anansi's particular genius became more than entertainment. A small creature with no power, defeating large creatures with all the power, was not a charming folktale. It was instruction. It was documentation of a survival strategy. It was the record of how intelligence and humor and lateral thinking could navigate, and sometimes defeat a world specifically designed to make such navigation impossible. The stories evolved. New Anansi tales were told that had never been told in Ghana, because Ghana had not had this landscape of terror to navigate, and the stories needed to fit the world in which they were being told. But the core remained. The spider who wins not by being strong, but by understanding how the strong think, by finding the thread of pride or hunger or assumption that runs through every powerful thing, and pulling it at exactly the right moment. Why Anansi is the god of stories. The deepest thing about the Anansi tradition is not the cleverness of any individual trick. It is the claim embedded in the origin story, the claim that stories themselves had to be won, that they were not free, that the right to tell and pass on the accounts of the world cost something real and was paid for by someone who had no obvious right to pay it and no obvious power to do so. Every story that has ever been told in this tradition belongs to Anansi because Anansi paid for it. The transaction is complete and permanent and applies retroactively to every story that came before and extends forward to every story that will come after. To tell a story is to use something Anansi bought. To listen to a story is to receive something he carried down from the sky. In the Akan tradition, it was customary to begin a story by acknowledging this. To say, in effect, that these are Anansi stories. To name the owner before taking what he owned and passing it on. The spider who owned nothing went to the god who owned everything and came back with the only thing that truly matters, the record of existence itself, the means by which anything that happened could be remembered and passed on and made available to people who were not there when it happened. He did it without weapons. He did it without armies. He did it by thinking more carefully than anyone else about the distance between what the powerful believe about themselves and what is actually true, and then building with patience and vine and sticky gum and a hollow gourd filled with water, the exact structure needed to show them the difference. The stories have been as ever since.